Well, we are here today with Rosemary Davidson Vreeland. We're in Whitehall, and this interview is being conducted for the White Lake Environmental History Project. And Rosemary, I want to ask you first if you've read the legal release.
Yes,
And you've signed it.
yes.
Oh, thank you very much. And do want to disclose that Rosemary was one of my favorite middle school teachers.
And Tanya was one of my favorite middle school students.
And my name is Tanya Kavala, and I'm conducting the interview, and then Oscar Osbo is the videographer. And we're going to get started with just, just finding out a little bit about how you ended up in the White Lake area. What's a little bit of your background and family history?
I was newly married to Jim Davidson in Niagara Falls, and he had the opportunity to come to Montague. It seemed like a wonderful thing for us to relocate, and the thing that impressed me when I first came were the people. The people were so kind and so wanting to be good to you. I don't think there was any unpleasantness about our coming. There was very little housing. Jim came out first, and it could not really find a place for us to live. George and Marge Myers, who ran the popular Goody Goody restaurant, offered Jim the cottage on their property on Bluff Road on White Lake, and they didn't normally rent it. And that was just an example of how wonderful the people were, and George and Marge were very kind to me because I was there in the middle of the winter, alone, no car.
About how many people from Hooker Chemical came from the Niagara area?
I'm sorry, I don't really know. A lot of the operation at Hooker was automatic. It ran with a rather low employee number, and I didn't know any of these people before we come out. Jim, of course, did, because he had worked, I think, maybe 2 years. We met, I worked at Hooker very briefly also. And we met in a lab, which was a government project, a cost plus project, so it was pretty casual, and it was one of those love at first sight things. You know, and I was 22. I was getting really past the marriageable age of the time, and so that I was definitely among the younger as a newlywed. Most of the people who came, I think, were more established and had children.
So your roots and your husband's were in New York?
Mine were, Jim was from Pennsylvania, but many people came to Niagara Falls from Pennsylvania because of the opportunity to work in the chemical industry.
Can you describe your earliest memories of White Lake?
Yes. We did not really consider White Lake as pristine. My children never swam in White Lake or waded or splashed in White Lake because there was something called swimmer's itch. I don't know, it was associated with snails or some dreaded thing. I know I had rashes on my ankles when I was on Bluff Road that spring from wading there. Whether that could very well just have been a thing that exists in these smaller lakes. it's sort of interesting that only one person who I recall who came out from Niagara Falls in supervision chose to live on White Lake. And now, of course, it's certainly the place to live. I had no interest in living on White Lake.
I know that at some point the weed situation became a problem too.
Mm-hmm.
Which made swimming not as appealing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and probably was a breeding ground for these, whatever these organisms were. Mm.
When you came to the area, you had a fairly positive reception from the local people then.
Oh yes, definitely. And it's rather interesting that even now, when I meet people whose parents perhaps I knew and are in local businesses, or when I'm asked how I got here, I sort of apologetically say, I came with the dreaded hooker, and almost a universal response, particularly from business people's families, is don't say that. Hooker brought a lot of good to the area. I can't say as they left with a lot of good.
Were you aware at all of the resort industry?
Not before I came. I think it was probably one of the last years that there was a thing out, kind of by the yacht club, I think, called the Ark. And I guess you walked, I can't really remember, I think we walked across the ice and then went in this great little building with holes in the floor and could fish. Just with a sweater on. It was great. I knew a little bit about Sylvan Beach, and I very quickly learned about White Lake Golf Course because my husband was a golfer. But times have changed. Families don't come and spend a summer in one place with Dad coming on weekends, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that was something that characterized our area
Yes.
for a good period of time.
Yes.
When did you first remember hearing about pollution associated with White Lake or Hooker Chemical?
I don't exactly know how to answer that question. I guess after the plant became operational, we knew intellectually that where there were chemical industries, there were pollutions. At that time, we still thought of things going away. We weren't aware that there is no away. And I think that there was a definite loyalty of employees to their employer. People didn't switch jobs. They stayed with the one company and were promoted from within. It was totally different at that time. And growing up in Niagara Falls, where pollution was just a way of life, the unfortunate part was the nature of the chemicals and in the proximity to the lake. But when I was a child in Niagara Falls, the drinking water intake was on the lower Niagara River. Just above it, a few miles, Buffalo dumped their sewage. This was the way my generation lived. We didn't seem to think ahead, or we didn't seem to think that would happen to us.
What did your husband do at
My husband was the works chemist. He came out during construction to have the labs built to what he considered his specifications. In addition to that, he was a troubleshooter. When things went wrong, the phone would ring in the middle of the night, and the person would say, "Is Jim there?" I said, "Well, where do you think he is at 3 o'clock in the morning?" "Yes, he's there. He's sleeping." But he's trying to turn off the alarm clock because he doesn't know it's the telephone. But he was dedicated to Hooker. We made a good living. We loved the community.
And then you worked as a teacher then?
I didn't teach until my own children were in school, and one of them kept coming home and saying, "My teacher says," and my reaction was, "What is this your teacher says? How about what your mother says?" And I decided maybe I wanted to be the person that the children went home and said, "My teacher says." I loved it. I had 2 years of transferable credit, and I went back to school, and I taught for almost 20 years. I met wonderful people who I now still see as adults, supportive parents. It was, my own children were in the system.
How did you mentioned you maybe not quite specifically aware of when the pollution concerns arose, but when it became to be maybe in conversations in communities, is that was that something that was uncomfortable working with Jim working for the company?
When things were really severe, we didn't discuss it at home because in my heart of hearts, I was an environmentalist, and there were a lot of things that bothered me. I guess I didn't totally expect as much that the employees would be the one to solve the problem. We don't bite the hand that feeds us. I thought that the state government should have done more. I can't believe that the DNR, if they didn't see the famous barrels, that they couldn't have. I mean, you could fly over that area and know what was happening. And I think that the DNR had some access. How could they not have if they chose to? And I don't know what their problem was.
Do you think there may have been a difference between workers versus management, or as far as who knew what was going on and who was concerned?
I guess I've never thought about that. I would assume that everyone would know. Certainly the workers would be right on the front lines there, and possibly some of the of supervision may not have been quite as aware, but certainly any of the engineers, the people who supervise the process, I would assume would have been aware. And I know it's not a really popular opinion, and I don't mean it as an excuse for the company. I've suffered great personal loss from things that very possibly came from Hooker Chemical. But it, some of it doubtless was the times. Things are different
Yeah.
than from the things that, when I was a child, one of our very favorite activities was to sit on the floor with my brother and put coins in a little container of mercury because it made them really shiny, or you could spill the mercury on the floor and with your finger make it all come together. It was great fun. Where the mercury came from, I have no idea. I was probably preschool. But it was something we did, and I would assume my parents were aware we did. The blood pressure sphygmomanometers that were in common use had a big column of mercury in it. All thermometers. The mercury was around, and we played in it. Now we worry about parts per million in a fish, and I'm glad we do. But things were different.
Do you think it was more of a kind of a trusting attitude, but also maybe, I mean, certainly information is a lot more available these days.
Yes, yes. I think that there perhaps was somewhat of a paternal feeling, perhaps, towards an employer. I think also there was complacency. I think my generation perhaps just felt, well, it'll work out.
Did you, so for the most part, when the, the pollution issue was the topic of conversation in the community, you stayed out of the conversations?
I can remember when things first got really serious, parents coming in at scheduled parent-teacher conferences, and it just is general conversation. It was a big topic of conversation, and I always made it a point very, very early in the conversation to tell them that my husband was employed there and that it really was not a topic that I felt free to discuss.
When the state did get involved, what was the state of mind of workers at that point?
My state of mind was too little too late. I think that a lot of this could have been avoided if we had had more pressure put on, and it's unfortunate that we didn't have a lot of straight arrows who were willing to come forward, and I think we need to remember too that Occidental is a huge corporation. I think things may have been different, I don't know, but it may have been different if the company had remained as Hooker Chemical. Hooker Chemical they were a family in Niagara Falls, and the Hooker Chemical, people named Hooker invented the electrolytic cells that took the salt that was pumped out of the ground in Montague and go through these electric cells and have chlorine come off one end and caustic soda off the other. We used to kind of joke every once in a while the wells would clog up with oil. And Hooker was the only company that drilled a well with the hope of getting salt, and when they got oil, it was not good.
Did you think do you think you understood the pollution problem, especially being a science teacher? Do you think you understood what happened and how it affected the lake?
My immediate concern were the possibilities, or I like to think probabilities, of health problems in the area. I think that there should have been a unbiased investigation of the prevalence of cancer and some odd cancers. And to the best of my knowledge, that wasn't done at the time. Things are done now, but a lot of that is certainly after the fact.
Now, I know that Hooker Chemical, or Occidental, did conduct a study of its employees for about 5 years. And then they discontinued that.
Mm-hmm.
Had you been aware of that at all?
I have never been approached. Now, that could have been, people who just knew us and, hey, they're working, that. But the health problems certainly were not restricted to employees. The health problems are community-wide, I believe.
Do you, how do you think overall the issue of pollution affected the White Lake area, kind of economically, socially, image-wise?
I guess you have to go back to the effect on the community of the chemical industries coming in the first place. And many people at that time, through their parents at least, they knew about the 30s. They knew how bad things could be. Many people had not had steady employment in this area, and I think that as a result, you didn't start from one particular plane. You built up to some of the contributions, and then of course the plunge down much deeper than what was there in the first place.
Do you were you aware of any community leaders at the time who were involved, and did you have any opinions on them, or local activists?
Was I personally involved in any activities?
Well, or were you aware of some of the local activists and protests? And
yes, like obviously they were publicized. I don't think that they were taken seriously. Perhaps should have. I didn't know any of the individuals. I would say the general opinion was, well, these are just people who don't really know, and they're alarmists. And it's unfortunate that the corporation, way beyond Montague, didn't give them more credit.
Are you aware at all of any of the efforts made to clean up the lake?
Yes, and I think cleaning up the lake is fabulous. I know there are many truly dedicated people who have contributed many hours and money in an attempt to clean up the lake, perhaps to a state where the lake is even more desirable than it was before the 50s, when the chemical industry first arrived.
What do you see as the greatest need as far as protection of environmental protection or protection of the lake? What do we need to be doing, do you think?
Well, hindsight is always better, and to my mind, there's absolutely no possibility of history repeating itself here or in other places. The lake is important to the area, I don't believe, unfortunately, because of the climate, that there's ever going to be the financial gain to the community that there was from employment, but perhaps that's not as important. Things have changed. Things change all the time. And I love the lake. I love the community. This is my home.
Do you think we value the lake a little differently?
Oh yes, oh yes. I think that both of my sons left home for advanced educations. They both came back to the area. They didn't come back to be close to mother. They came back because of the beauty of White Lake, and of course probably even more so of Lake Michigan and the White Lake Golf Course maybe.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you would like to talk about?
I hope that that I have come through as not trying to get Hooker off the hook, but still recognizing that attitudes are different with different generations, unfortunately. Perhaps we learn from previous generations. I think that that today's workers, today's people in their 40s and 50s, attitude would have been different. They wouldn't have risked living in under those conditions, but that wasn't the way it was.
Do you think workers are more likely to speak out in these times?
I would like to think so, yes. At least take a personal stand, if not to solve the problem, to remove themselves from it. I don't think anyone at Hooker, I'm certain that no one in supervision, I don't think many people who were employed in the process ever thought of quitting their jobs. They thought the employer was pretty good. You know, they had Christmas parties for the children and picnics in the summer and safety prizes and things that were very new to someone who had never worked for a corporation. The supervisors were entertained at the lovely Pack estate, and there was fringe. Many people in the process anyway were considered that they were making very good money. There was very little competition as to where you could work, and certainly no place where you could work and be rewarded with salaries and benefits.
What do you think are the biggest lessons the community learned through the process?
Well, I think it's wider than just the community. I think it's the world, the developed nations of the world are very much aware that we need to be responsible. We're seeing the climate problems. We're seeing all kinds of things are happening, and I think most thinking people are aware that much of this is by our own activities. And and it's serious business. I mean, we're talking about our children's lives, our grandchildren.
Was there anything else you would like to add?
That I appreciate being asked to come. I'm very honored to be asked to come. Hooker played a big part in my life, obviously. Teaching in the White House schools was a privilege that changed my life in many ways. Meeting people who were so kind and considerate. I mentioned Marge and George Myers. The Hunt family provided us with housing a couple of times too, and always made us feel welcome to the community. This was a community that those of us who were raised in cities and came. There was no supermarket. There were a lot of roads that weren't paved. It was an adventure. The people who came banded together. Christmas, those of us who had no family nearby, was always Christmas Eve. People gathered together. The 4th of July, the supervisory people gathered together through the years, and it's a great community. We're privileged to live here.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.